This is a video lesson on brushes and brush strokes, and I'll be showing you the brushes that I like the best and why, because there's a multitude of brushes on the market and I don't want you to waste your money. So I'll show you the ones that I prefer and how they work for me. I'll also show you some exercises that you can do, some brush strokes that you can practice. I'll show you how to hold the brush properly while you're painting, and finally how to clean your brushes. So let's get started. This is a video lesson on brush strokes for the watercolor painter. And first I want to show you the brushes that I use the most. These four right here are Kolinsky Sable. And what that means is the hair in the brush has been taken out of the tail of a Kolinsky mink and then put back in the brush in exactly the same order. And so that's one of the reasons that makes them quite expensive. And they really are a lot more money, but they're the nicest tool that you can work with. Now, it's not necessary to use sable brushes, particularly when you're starting. I recommend you use synthetic brushes. And they look just about the same, but they're synthetic hair instead of natural Kolinsky mink hair. And that makes them a lot less expensive. They're very durable, they hold up well, and they work really well, particularly when you're studying painting in the beginning. So I recommend you start with sable brushes. Now, these are called round, and they have that shape where they come to a gentle point like that. Particularly when they're dry, they look a little bit more open like this, but as soon as you get it wet, they come to a nice point like this. And this is a half round, and it's shaped. It's flat, but it's sort of round across the top. That's called a half round. This is a flat brush, and this one is 1.5 inches, which I use for big washes. That's synthetic. This is an Isabey brush, which is a wonderful brush to use, but not in the beginning. I wouldn't recommend that for somebody that's just starting in watercolor. You should paint for a while before you try an Isabey brush, because they hold so much water and paint that it takes a little bit more practice. Now, this is a flat, and it's just what it sounds like. It has a chiseled end on it, flat like that, and a lot of artists use those quite a bit more than I do. I don't use them very often. This one is called a script, and let me get it wet so it comes to a point. This was originally designed for sign painters, and it has long hair, brush hairs on it, and it holds a lot of water and paint, yet you can do a lot of fine detail work with it. And that's the thing I really like. You don't have to keep going back into the paint and water supply because of those long hairs. Now, this is an example of a little tiny brush. And these are only good for one thing, and that's just to throw them away and get rid of them. They really have no value, and I don't want anybody using those. I don't let anybody use them in my classes. They make your paintings look overworked and fussy, and so don't waste your money on any of those. Always try to use the biggest brush you can for whatever you're painting. This is a number 10, and this is a Kolinsky Sable again. So I'm going to get it nice and wet, and then you can snap the brush and take some of the water out of it, or you can just stroke it across a paper towel like that, because you want to get some of the water out of the brush. Now I'm just going to pick up some color. This is cobalt violet, and I'll show you the way I like to use the brush. I do a technique called point, press, and lift, where I put the point right down where I want the color, press the brush down, move it slightly, and then lift. And one of the things I like about this that some people don't like is the fact that there's different variations in that stroke like that. If I want a smooth, even stroke, that's a different technique. But this technique of point, press, and lift really gives me the rhythm that I want for the painting. There it is again, just point, press, and lift. If I remember to do this, when I'm painting, it keeps me in a nice rhythm so I don't work too fast. I have better control over the brush strokes, and it's been a really effective way of painting. And I try to do a lot of that when I'm working on a watercolor painting. I want to show you how to hold the brush. Every watercolor brush has a balance to it. So you should hold it in your hand like this and move it around until you find that kind of sweet spot where the end of the brush, the painting part of the brush, is a little bit heavier than the back part. It'll be comfortable in your hand and it'll keep you from doing this. You don't want to hold it like you would a pen or a pencil. You want to hold it back here in that nice balance area. Now I'm going to show you some other things you can do with the brush. And what's really important is to move the brush in the direction that the handle is pointed. So it would be a stroke like that, or like this, or like this, always moving in the direction that the handle is pointed. And the reason for that is brushes are expensive. And if you do, I'm not even going to put this on the paper, but if you do this and this with the brush, all you're doing is tearing it up, because the brush, or the paper, I'm sorry, has some texture to it. This is cold press and it has some texture to it. And it's like sandpaper. So if you're scrubbing the brush back and forth like this, you're just tearing up an expensive brush, and you don't want to do that. So now let me show you again about the point, press, and lift. I've got too much paint on my brush there. Oh, the phone is ringing. Well, I better get this. It might be Hollywood calling. We're back after the phone call, and now I want to show you some more about your brushes. And one of the things that is really important, and I'll take out some cerulean and manganese blue for this. Don't outline like this and then go in and fill it in. That just ends up looking overworked. So if you want something like that, say the shape of an apple, for example, start inside like this and work your way out and fill the shape up that way, rather than doing some outline first. That's really important, because your paintings will look far less overworked if you do it that way, from the inside out. Now I want to show you a couple techniques that are sort of watercolor techniques. And I'm just loading up my brush here with plenty of water and paint. If you take the brush like this and kind of set it down on its side and move quickly like that, this is called dry brush, where the brush skips along like that, where you can see white bits of paper. I'll try it again here. That's another nice example of a brush stroke that's dry brush. And if you think of something like a dead log or the side of a barn, anything like that, a good dry brush stroke like that, where you have little bits of white paper showing through like that, can be very effective. And that's called dry brush. Now another technique that I want to show you, and this one's actually a lot of fun, it's called spattering. And what you do is you load up your brush like this, and you have to smack the brush against something. I'm using my finger like this, and it just spatters all over the paper like that. Now, one thing that's important, and I'm going to use a paper towel for this, and I just have a hole cut into the paper towel. So you lay it on the paper like this, and leave the opening where you want the spattering. That way, anything that you don't want spattering on will be captured by the paper towel. So you just go like this, get some nice spattering on there, and it ends up where you want it instead of all over the painting. So that's an example of dry brush and spattering. And those are watercolor techniques that you can do with your brush. Now I'm going to show you how to use the rigger brush. Again, I'm holding it in that balance area so I can move it nicely. And with all your brushes, I want you to get in the habit of you moving your arm, not your wrist, back and forth. You'll just end up with better brush strokes if you do that. I'm loading up my brush here, and I want to show you with the rigger brush, you can do a lot of fine little detail work. I'll just make some little lines on here. And if you notice, I'm using my little finger to balance my hand so that I don't have my hand like this dragging through the painting. So if you want to do fine detail work, use your little finger to create kind of a balance for you, and use the rigger brush, and you can do nice little detail work like that, just as fine as you want. And also a good sable brush will have a nice point on it. Let me grab one here. When you get it wet and load it up with paint, my philosophy is to use the biggest brush you can for whatever you're doing. And I'll show you the difference here. This has a nice point on it, even though it's a big brush. So I can do detail work like that with a bigger brush as well. And if I want it to be even finer than that, that's when I reach for the rigger brush. Now I want to show you how I use my flat brush. And when I reach for this brush, it's when I want an area of a flat wash where you don't see a lot of lines and so forth in it. And I'm wetting the paper first. Always a good idea if you want a flat wash. And with this big brush, this big flat brush, I get a nice even distribution of water like that. Now I've loaded my brush up. I've used some cerulean blue and a little bit of cobalt violet. And I'm just going to make strokes across here like this. You can see how having the paper wet in the beginning makes this go on like this. And just a few strokes like that, and as that dries, it'll smooth together like that, and you get a fairly even wash. That's as even as I want any of the washes to be in my paintings. And that's what this big 1.5-inch brush is really good for. Think of a sky area, for example. That would be something, if there was a big sky area in the painting, that's where I would reach for this bigger brush. Now I'll show you how to take care of your brushes, how to clean them. This is a product called Brush Cleaner, and it's for watercolor brushes as well as oil painting and acrylic. And just take the lid off here. You can see it's kind of a soapy material in there. I've got my brush nice and wet, so I'm just going to go in here and scrub it like this, get it nice and covered with soap. Then I like to use the palm of my hand like this, just because it makes a perfect shape and your hand is nice and soft so your brush doesn't get torn up. You can see paint coming out of that now. It's changing the color of the soap. I'm going to clean or rinse the brush out again. Do it one more time so I get it really nice and clean. Then I will rinse my brush out completely and wipe it on a paper towel a little bit. But now you can see just clear water coming off. Then I kind of twirl it a little bit like that, or with my fingers I can wring it out a little bit and reshape the point. I can snap it like that to bring it to a nice point. And then the brush should be laid down on its side. It should never be left in a water container for any length of time, because it'll bend the brush like that, and if you leave it in there long enough, that will become permanent, and that's really a nuisance. So don't leave your brushes in the water container for more than a few seconds at a time. Just lay them down like that when you're finished after they're clean, and it will work out just great for you. Now we're going to look at a couple of my paintings. and see visible brush strokes in them. And the first painting is called Side Canal Venice, was actually painted on the spot in Venice, Italy. And the other one is called Ancient Images. And it is a painting from a series that I've been working on for years. A series inspired by the ancient cave paintings in southern France. So let's take a look. This is an example of one of my paintings that has visible brushwork in it. It's a painting of Venice, and you can see here in the water reflections that they're visible brush strokes, and to me that adds a nice rhythm to the painting. And you can see it also up here in the buildings as well. And this is just an example of how leaving the brushwork visible in a painting can make it that much more interesting. This is a painting of mine called Ancient Images, and it's from a series that I've been working on for several years, inspired by the cave paintings in southern France. And I wanted to use this particular painting because right here is a good example of spattering. That's where I just used a paper towel with an opening on it, put the opening in this area and spattered that paint on there. It turned out just the way I wanted. There's a couple more examples over here where the paint is spattered, and down here again. There's also some good examples of dry brush strokes in here. Right through here where this color fades down, through here, that's all done with dry brush. And there's some other examples where you have visible brush strokes in this painting. There's some brush strokes that you can see through here and through this area right here. There's a couple different values. Right here is another example of dry brush. This is kind of broken edge right here and right through there. And so this painting has examples of spattering, dry brush, and some visible brush strokes. So if you use the techniques that I talked about, spattering, dry brush, the point, press, and lift, if you wash your brushes, I don't do that every time I finish painting, but once a month or so I go through and wash all my brushes out with the brush cleaner. So if you do that, your brushes will stay in nice working order. And if you keep everything clean, your water, your color, and your brushes, it'll have a big effect on your painting. So this is Dennis Pendleton saying until next time, keep on painting.